My mother-in-law changed my baby's name while I was unconscious. I made her explain it to her entire family reunion. My husband Jester and I had been planning our daughter's name for years. We picked Luna Rose after my grandmother who raised me and his mother's middle name. We thought including Rose would make his mother Carol happy. We told everyone the name at the baby shower. Carol smiled and said it was nice but kept calling my bump her baby and saying we'd see what felt right when she arrived. I thought she meant when the baby arrived. I was wrong. I had a rough delivery that ended in an emergency C-section. I lost a lot of blood and was unconscious for 6 hours after. Jester was with me the whole time, holding our daughter and making sure I was stable. While we were in recovery, Carol volunteered to handle the birth certificate paperwork. She said she wanted to help since Jester was focused on me and the baby. She seemed so concerned and helpful. Jester gave her our filled-out forms and asked her to submit them to the hospital administration. 2 weeks later, we got the official birth certificate in the mail. My daughter's name was listed as Caroline Grace, not Luna Rose. Caroline Grace. Carol had scratched out our chosen name and written in her own first name and her mother's name. She literally named our baby after herself. When we confronted her, she said Luna was too trendy and our daughter deserved a classic name with family meaning. She said Caroline was a stronger name for a future professional. She said we'd thank her when our daughter got into college because Luna sounded like a stripper name. She actually said that about the name we'd chosen to honor my dead grandmother. Jester was furious, but Carol started crying about how she was just trying to help. She said we were young and emotional and she had more experience with these things. She raised Jester, didn't she? She knew what was best for our family. She said the baby looked like a Caroline anyway, and Luna didn't suit her face. The audacity of this woman to look at our 2-week-old baby and decide her face didn't match her name. We immediately started the legal process to change it, but were told it would take months and cost us hundreds of dollars. We had to get a court order, publish announcements in the newspaper, and appear before a judge. All because Carol thought she knew better. Meanwhile, Carol started calling our daughter Caroline in front of everyone. She bought personalized blankets with Caroline embroidered on them. She made a Facebook announcement welcoming baby Caroline to the family. When people asked about the name change, she said we'd reconsidered after seeing how perfect Caroline was for our little angel. She told her book club we'd asked her to choose the name as an honor to her. My mother called confused, asking why we hadn't told her about changing the name. Carol had called extended family on both sides announcing the real name and saying Luna was just a placeholder until we met the baby. She made us look indecisive and flaky to everyone. The worst part was she kept insisting she did us a favor. She'd say things like Caroline would age better than Luna. She said kids would make fun of Luna, but Caroline commanded respect. She bought a custom nursery sign that said Caroline's room and hung it while babysitting. When I took it down, she accused me of not accepting help and being too proud. She told Jester I had postpartum depression because I couldn't accept the name change. 3 months into this nightmare, Carol's family reunion was coming up. It happened every 5 years, and this was the first time the new baby would meet all the relatives. Carol had been bragging about little Caroline for months. She'd sent photos to all her cousins and siblings saying how proud she was to have a granddaughter named after her. She even ordered matching shirts for her and the baby that said Caroline Sr. and Caroline Jr. That's when I found my opportunity. I called Carol's older sister Ruth, who was organizing the reunion. I mentioned how excited I was for everyone to meet Luna Rose and how thoughtful it was that Carol supported us through the name change drama. Ruth was confused. I explained that someone at the hospital had accidentally written Caroline on the birth certificate, and we'd been fighting to fix it for months. I said Carol had been so helpful in dealing with the bureaucracy and costs. Ruth was horrified. She knew Carol had a history of controlling behavior, but changing a baby's name was insane. The day of the reunion, Carol showed up in her Caroline Sr. shirt with the baby and the matching junior one. She'd insisted on driving separately so she could make a grand entrance with her Caroline. She walked in expecting applause and got dead silence. Ruth had told everyone what really happened. Ruth didn't say anything for what felt like forever after I finished explaining what Carol had done with the birth certificate. I counted the seconds in my head while holding Luna against my chest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The silence stretched so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then Ruth's voice came back and she sounded completely different. Her usual cheerful tone was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. She told me she was calling an emergency meeting with Carol's sisters before the reunion happened. She said Marie needed to hear this directly from me and Carol's other siblings too. I could hear her moving around on the other end, like she was already pacing and planning. She asked if I had copies of the legal documents showing what Carol did. I told her yes, I had everything. The original forms we filled out, the fraudulent birth certificate with Carol's handwriting, the court papers we filed to fix it. Ruth said to scan them and email them to her right away. She was going to make sure everyone in the family saw exactly what Carol had done before the reunion. Over the next few days, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from Carol's siblings. Marie called first, and I could tell Ruth had already talked to her because she sounded upset before I even said hello. She apologized for not knowing sooner, said she had no idea Carol would do something this extreme. I sent her the scanned documents like Ruth asked, and Marie went quiet while she looked at them. Then she started asking questions about the timeline, about what Carol said when we confronted her, about how much the legal fix was costing us. I answered everything while trying to keep my voice steady. Marie said she'd always known Carol was controlling, but this crossed every possible line. She said she was calling Carol's other siblings right away. The next day, Ruth called again to tell me they'd scheduled a family meeting at Marie's house for that weekend. Carol didn't know what was happening. They were going to confront her together about what she'd done. Ruth called me the Monday after that weekend meeting, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice before she even started talking. She said Carol cried through the whole thing, kept saying she was just trying to help us make a better choice. Carol told her sisters that Jester and I were too young and emotional to understand what makes a good name. She actually said Luna sounded cheap and Caroline was classier. Ruth said she'd never seen Carol so defensive, so completely unable to see what she'd done wrong. Marie apparently asked Carol directly how she would feel if someone had changed Jester's name without her permission when he was born. Carol said that was different because she would have chosen a good name to begin with. Several of Carol's siblings told Ruth afterward they were thinking about skipping the reunion entirely. They didn't want to celebrate with someone who would commit fraud against their own grandchild. Ruth sounded torn between anger at her sister and sadness that the family was fracturing over this. Jester's phone rang while we were eating dinner 2 weeks later, and I saw his mom's name on the screen. He looked at me before answering, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. He stepped into the other room, but I could still hear his side of the conversation. Carol was begging him to make me drop the legal case. She kept saying we should just accept Caroline as the baby's name and move on. Jester's voice got louder as he told her no. What she did was wrong, and we weren't backing down. He said she violated our trust and our rights as parents. Carol must have started crying because Jester went quiet for a minute, then said he loved her, but she needed to accept responsibility for her actions. And when he came back to the table, he looked completely drained. His eyes were red and he couldn't finish his food. He sat there staring at his plate while I held his hand across the table. Later that night, he told me his mom had never cried like that before, and it was killing him to stand firm against her. But he knew we had to. The envelope from the courthouse came on a Thursday afternoon 3 months after we'd started the whole legal process. My hands shook as I opened it, terrified something else had gone wrong. But there it was. The corrected birth certificate with Luna Rose printed in official black letters. Not Caroline Grace. Luna Rose, the name we'd chosen, the name that honored my grandmother, the name that was supposed to be there from the beginning. I sat down on the floor right there in the hallway and cried holding that piece of paper. No, $800 and 3 months of bureaucratic hell to fix what Carol had destroyed in 5 minutes. Jester came home from work and found me still sitting there, and he cried too. We held Luna between us and kept saying her real name over and over. Luna Rose. Luna Rose. Our daughter finally had her identity back. Carol's group text came through on Saturday morning while I was feeding Luna. It went to literally everyone in the extended family on both sides. She wrote that Jester and I had been brainwashed by radical parenting blogs and modern nonsense about letting children have weird names. She said she was the victim of our disrespect and lack of appreciation for her experience and wisdom. She said Caroline was a beautiful, classic name, and we were being stubborn and hurtful by rejecting it. She said she'd only ever tried to help us, and this was how we repaid her. The text was long and rambling and full of self-pity. My phone started buzzing immediately with messages from confused relatives asking what was going on. Then Ruth's response came through in the same group thread. She wrote that everyone should wait to hear the full story at the reunion before making judgments. She said there was a lot more to the situation than Carol was sharing. Several other family members started asking questions in the thread, but Ruth just kept saying to wait for the reunion. Jester and I spent the entire next weekend talking about whether we should even go to the reunion. I sat on the couch with Luna sleeping in my arms while Jester paced back and forth across the living room. He said maybe we should just skip it, avoid the drama entirely. But I kept thinking about how Carol had spent months telling everyone her version of events. She'd made us look flaky and indecisive. She'd lied to dozens of people about us asking her to choose the name. If we didn't show up, she'd just tell more lies about why we weren't there. Jester stopped pacing and looked at me. He said I was right. We needed to go specifically to set the record straight in front of everyone. Backing down now would let Carol control the story forever. She'd tell people we were too ashamed to face the family. She'd twist our absence into proof that she was right all along. We decided that night that we were going to the reunion, and we were going to make sure everyone knew the truth. Carol showed up at our house on a Tuesday afternoon 2 weeks before the reunion. I saw her car pull into the driveway and my stomach dropped. Jester was at work. She walked up to the front door carrying a shopping bag, and I could see those matching shirts through the plastic. Caroline Sr. and Caroline Jr. She rang the doorbell 3 times. I stood in the hallway holding Luna, trying to decide what to do. She rang again. I called Jester and he said he was leaving work right now, told me not to open the door. Carol started knocking, calling out that she knew we were home because my car was in the driveway. She said she just wanted to bring a gift for the baby. She said we were being ridiculous and childish. Jester's car pulled up 15 minutes later and he walked past his mother without saying hello. He opened the front door and I stepped back while he went outside. I watched through the window as he took the shopping bag from Carol and set it on the porch without looking inside. He told her she wasn't welcome here without calling first. Carol tried to push past him into the house, but Jester blocked the doorway. She started crying and saying he was breaking her heart. Jester said she broke our trust, and until she could respect our boundaries, these were the rules. He came back inside and locked the door while Carol stood on the porch crying. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the reunion, about walking into that pavilion with 40 family members staring at us. Carol would tell everyone I was the problem, that I'd turned Jester against his mother. They'd think I was the troublemaker who ruined family harmony over something stupid. I'd be the villain in Carol's story. Jester found me sitting in the nursery at 2 a.m, just watching Luna sleep. I told him I was scared of facing everyone, scared they'd all hate me. Jester sat down next to me on the floor and put his arm around my shoulders. He said Carol ruined the family harmony, not me. Carol committed fraud, not me. Carol lied to everyone, not me. All I did was demand that our daughter get to keep her own name. He said anyone who couldn't see that wasn't worth worrying about. But I kept thinking about how Carol would cry and play the victim, and people always believed the crying grandmother over the young daughter-in-law. Ruth called Thursday evening while I was giving Luna a bath. She said she needed to give me a heads up about something. She'd spent the last 2 weeks calling family members and telling them what really happened. Not Carol's version, the actual truth with the legal documents to back it up. Ruth said she'd talked to about 30 people so far. Most of them were completely shocked and angry at Carol. They couldn't believe she'd changed a baby's name without permission. But Ruth warned me that a few relatives still thought I was overreacting. Some of the older family members said names weren't that important, and I should just let it go for the sake of family peace. Ruth said most people understood this crossed a serious line, though. She said I shouldn't be surprised if some people were cold to me at the reunion, but the majority were on our side. I thanked her and tried to feel relieved, but all I could think about was facing those few people who thought I should have just accepted what Carol did. I woke up Saturday morning with my stomach in knots. Jester was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed staring at his phone. He looked up when I moved and gave me a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. We both knew what today meant. I fed Luna her bottle while Jester showered, and I tried not to think about walking into that pavilion full of Carol's relatives. The package from the custom print shop had arrived 2 days ago. Jester pulled out the tiny white onesie and held it up. Luna Rose was printed across the front in big purple letters with little stars around the name. It felt petty ordering it. It felt perfect, too. I needed this small thing to make me feel strong enough to face everyone. Jester dressed Luna while I got ready, and when he snapped the last button on the onesie, we both just stared at our daughter. She looked back at us with those big eyes that didn't understand any of this mess. I kissed her forehead and told Jester we should go before I lost my nerve. We loaded Luna into her car seat and drove in silence. The park was 20 minutes away, and Jester kept glancing at me at red lights like he wanted to say something but didn't know what. I watched the trees go by and tried to breathe normally. We pulled into the parking lot at 10:30, exactly 30 minutes after the reunion officially started. I didn't want to be first, but I also didn't want to make some grand late entrance. Jester parked and we sat there for a minute. He reached over and squeezed my hand. I grabbed the diaper bag and he got Luna out of her seat. We walked across the grass toward the big covered pavilion. I could see people already, maybe 30 or 40 relatives scattered around picnic tables. Kids were running around playing tag. Someone had set up a folding table with food. And there was Carol. She stood near the center of the pavilion in that awful Caroline Sr. shirt, bright pink with white letters. She was talking to a small group of older relatives, gesturing with her hands like she was telling some exciting story. She hadn't seen us yet. My hands started sweating. Ruth spotted us first. She broke away from a group near the food table and came straight toward us with her arms out. She pulled me into a huge hug that smelled like her flowery perfume. She stepped back and looked down at Luna in Jester's arms. Her voice carried across the pavilion when she spoke. She said she was so glad to finally meet baby Luna Rose. She said it loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. I saw confusion on some faces. They glanced toward Carol and then back at us. Carol's smile froze on her face mid-sentence. She stopped talking and just stared at us. Ruth kept going, asking how old Luna was now and saying what a beautiful name we'd chosen. More people were looking now. Carol started walking toward us. Her arms came up like she expected to just take Luna from Jester. She had this fake bright smile plastered on. Jester moved. He stepped between Carol and the baby, his body blocking her path. His voice was calm, but firm when he told her she wouldn't be holding our daughter today. He said she needed to respect our boundaries going forward. Carol's mouth fell open. She looked around like she was checking if anyone else had heard. People were definitely watching now. Carol's face went red and she started to say something, but a woman with gray hair came over. Marie. I recognized her from photos Jester had shown me. She came straight to me and put her hand on my arm. She apologized directly to me for not realizing sooner what Carol had done. She said Carol had always been controlling, but this was beyond anything they'd expected. She said she was glad we were standing up to her. Her voice wasn't quiet either. Other relatives were drifting closer now, pretending to get food or check on kids but clearly listening. Carol backed up a step. She looked around at the growing audience and I could see her trying to figure out how to handle this. Then her voice suddenly rang out across the whole pavilion. She asked everyone to gather for a family photo with baby Caroline. The pavilion went completely silent. About 40 people turned to look. Some stared at Carol. Some stared at us. Some looked back and forth like they were watching a tennis match. Nobody moved toward her for the photo. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Then Ruth stepped forward into the middle of the space between Carol and our little group. Her voice was loud and clear when she announced there seemed to be some confusion about the baby's name. She said perhaps Carol would like to explain to everyone what really happened with the birth certificate. Carol's face went completely white. All the color just drained out. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Ruth didn't let up. She asked Carol directly if she had changed our baby's name without our permission while I was unconscious. The entire pavilion erupted. People started talking all at once, shocked voices asking what Ruth meant. Carol stammered something about a paperwork mix-up at the hospital. She tried to laugh, but it came out nervous and fake. Ruth cut her off. She asked again, louder this time, if Carol had changed the name without permission. A woman I didn't know spoke up from the crowd. Trinity, I realized from Jester's descriptions. She asked how changing someone's baby's name without permission could possibly be considered help. More voices joined in. Carol tried to talk over them. She said she was just helping because we were too emotional to think clearly. She said she had more experience. She said she knew what was best. Jester's voice cut through the noise. It was shaking with anger in a way I'd never heard before. He described coming out of recovery to find his mother had committed fraud on our daughter's birth certificate. He pulled the folded legal documents out of his jacket pocket and held them up. He showed everyone the unauthorized changes. He told them about the $800 we'd spent fixing it. He told them about the 3 months of court appearances and newspaper publications. His hands were shaking as he held up the papers. Carol stood there in her stupid pink shirt with her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had nowhere to hide now. Everyone was staring at her. The truth was finally out there in front of her entire family, and there was nothing she could do to take it back. Carol's face crumpled and tears started streaming down her cheeks. She looked around at everyone staring at her and her whole body seemed to shake. She kept saying she only wanted what was best for her granddaughter. She said we were being so cruel to humiliate her like this in front of everyone. Her voice got higher and louder as she talked. She said she was just trying to help us make a good choice. She said young parents don't always know what's best. Several relatives shifted their weight and looked down at their feet. A few people glanced at each other, but nobody stepped forward to defend her. Nobody put their arm around her or told us to stop. The silence from the crowd felt heavy and uncomfortable. Carol kept crying and wiping her eyes with her hands. She looked at Jester like she expected him to make this all go away. He just stood there holding Luna and staring at his mother with this expression I'd never seen before. It was like he was looking at a stranger. Wyatt stepped forward from the crowd. He was Carol's cousin, and I'd only met him once before at another family event. His voice was calm, but firm, when he asked Carol why she thought she had the right to override our choice as parents. He said he'd been listening to everything, and he couldn't understand how she justified what she did. Carol opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. She stammered something about experience and knowing better. She said we were too young and emotional to think clearly. Wyatt shook his head and asked again why that gave her the right to commit fraud on legal documents. Carol's crying got louder, and she kept saying we don't understand. She repeated it over and over like it was an answer. She said nobody understood what she was trying to do. She said she raised Jester and he turned out fine, so obviously she knew about parenting. Her words weren't making sense anymore, and people in the crowd started whispering to each other. Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out several pieces of paper. She held them up so everyone could see. She said these were screenshots from Carol's Facebook page. Her voice carried across the whole pavilion as she started reading them out loud. The first one was Carol's post announcing baby Caroline's birth. Ruth read how Carol wrote that we'd asked her to choose the perfect name as a special honor. She read the part where Carol said Luna was just a temporary placeholder until we met the baby and realized Caroline was perfect. Carol's face turned bright red as Ruth kept reading. Another post talked about how proud Carol was to have a granddaughter named after her. Another one said she'd always dreamed of this honor, and we were such thoughtful parents. Ruth's voice never wavered as she read every lie Carol had posted. People in the crowd started shaking their heads. Some of them pulled out their own phones like they were checking if the posts were real. Carol tried to interrupt, but Ruth just talked louder. She read a comment where Carol told someone that Caroline was a family tradition we wanted to continue. She read another where Carol said we'd realized during delivery that Luna didn't suit our daughter's face. The lies just kept stacking up with each post Ruth read. Carol had nowhere to hide from her own words. Marie stepped forward next to Ruth. She said she had something to add to this. Her voice was quieter than Ruth's, but everyone still listened. She said Carol had been telling her book club for months about naming her granddaughter after herself. She said Carol described it as a special honor we'd bestowed on her. She said Carol brought photos to book club and talked about how meaningful it was that we chose Caroline. Marie looked directly at Carol and said she felt foolish now for believing those stories. She said she'd been bragging to her own friends about her sister getting this honor. Now she knew it was all lies. The crowd started talking louder now. People weren't even trying to whisper anymore. I heard someone say they couldn't believe Carol would lie like that. Someone else said they'd seen those Facebook posts and thought they were true. The noise got louder as more people shared what Carol had told them. I felt my throat get tight and my hands started shaking. I'd been standing there holding everything in while everyone else talked. Now I needed to say something. My voice came out stronger than I expected when I started talking. I described waking up from the emergency surgery. I told them about the blood loss and being unconscious for 6 hours. I explained how scared Jester was and how he stayed with me the whole time. Then I described getting that birth certificate in the mail 2 weeks later. I told them what it felt like to see Caroline Grace written where Luna Rose should have been. I said it felt like someone had stolen my daughter's identity while I was unconscious and couldn't protect her. I talked about my grandmother who raised me after my parents died. I explained that Luna was her name and how much she meant to me. I said Carol took that away and replaced it with her own name, like my grandmother didn't matter. Several women in the crowd had tears in their eyes now. One of them put her hand over her mouth. Another woman nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. I saw Jester's aunt wipe her eyes. The emotional impact was hitting people in a way the legal arguments hadn't. Carol tried to talk over me. Her voice was desperate now. She said she was protecting our daughter from a silly, trendy name. She said Luna would hurt our daughter's future prospects. She said kids would make fun of Luna at the school. She said Caroline was classic and professional and respectable. She kept listing reasons why she was right, like if she said enough of them, someone would agree. Carly spoke up from the side of the crowd. She said Luna was a beautiful name. She said lots of kids had nature names now and nobody got made fun of. She said her own daughter's class had a river and a sage and a willow. She looked at Carol and said even if Luna was the worst name in the world, Carol still had no right to make that decision. She said parents get to name their own children regardless of what grandparents think. More people nodded in agreement. Flynn raised his hand like he was in a classroom. He asked about the legal costs Jester had mentioned earlier. Jester shifted Luna to his other arm and explained everything. He said we spent $800 on legal fees. He said we had to get a court order and publish announcements in the newspaper. He said we had to appear before a judge. He said the whole process took 3 months. He held up 3 fingers to emphasize it. He said Carol did all that damage in 5 minutes of paperwork fraud. He said 5 minutes of her thinking she knew better cost us $800 and 3 months of stress. Several relatives looked shocked. I heard someone say they had no idea it was that complicated. Someone else said $800 was a lot of money for new parents. The financial impact seemed to make it real for people who maybe didn't understand the emotional side. Carol's crying got even louder. She turned to Jester and begged him to make this stop. She said I was turning the whole family against her. She said he needed to protect his mother. She reached out toward him like she wanted him to come to her. Jester's voice was quiet, but everyone heard it anyway. He told her she did this to herself. He said she violated our trust and our rights as parents. He said she lied to everyone for months. He said she committed fraud on legal documents. He said every consequence she was facing now was because of choices she made. He said he couldn't protect her from the results of her own actions. His hands were shaking as he held Luna, but his voice stayed steady. Trinity stepped forward from where she'd been standing with Wyatt. She suggested maybe Carol should apologize to us. She said maybe Carol should offer to pay us back for the legal fees. She said that would be a good starting point for making this right. She said it wouldn't fix everything, but it would show Carol actually felt sorry for what she did. The crowd went quiet, waiting for Carol's response. Carol looked at Trinity like she'd suggested something crazy. Her face showed complete horror at the idea. She shook her head hard. She said she wasn't paying for anything. She said she didn't do anything wrong. She said we were the ones who should apologize for embarrassing her. She said we owed her an apology for making her look bad in front of her family. That response told me everything I needed to know. She still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She still thought she was the victim. Instead of apologizing or even pretending to be sorry, Carol grabbed the bottom of her Caroline Sr. shirt. She pulled it up over her head in one quick motion. She wasn't wearing anything underneath except a tank top. She threw the pink shirt on the ground and stomped on it. Then she turned and started running toward the parking lot. Her flip-flops smacked against her feet as she ran. Several relatives started moving like they were going to follow her. Ruth held up both hands to stop them. She said Carol needed to sit with the consequences of her actions for once. She said running after her and comforting her would just teach her that throwing tantrums works. She said Carol had been getting away with controlling behavior for decades because family members always rushed to smooth things over. She said not this time. The relatives who'd started to follow Carol stopped and turned back. Carol kept running until she reached her car. We all watched her get in and slam the door. The engine started and she backed out fast enough that her tires squealed. Then she was gone, and the pavilion was completely silent except for Luna making little baby noises. The next hour passed in a blur of conversations with relatives who kept approaching me. Trinity came over first and apologized for not questioning Carol's story sooner. She said she'd always thought something seemed off about the whole Caroline announcement, but figured it wasn't her place to ask. Wyatt stood next to her and nodded along, saying they felt terrible about the matching shirts Carol had tried to get them to wear too. I thanked them and told them it wasn't their fault. Carol was good at making people believe her version of events. Raphael came by with Marie and said he wished he'd known what was really happening. He asked how much the legal fees had cost us, and looked genuinely angry when I told him the full amount. Marie squeezed my hand and said family should support each other, not make things harder. An older cousin whose name I couldn't remember approached next and started talking about how things were different in her generation. She said parents respected their elders back then and didn't make such a fuss about these things. I felt my jaw clench, but before I could respond, Ruth appeared at my side. She told the cousin firmly that changing legal documents without permission was fraud, not a generational difference. The cousin walked away looking annoyed. Jester stayed close to me the whole time, holding Luna and occasionally touching my shoulder. I could see the stress on his face, but also something that looked like relief. People kept coming up to see the baby, and everyone made a point of saying Luna's name clearly. Some relatives asked to hold her, and I let them, watching carefully as they cooed over her and told me she was beautiful. A few people mentioned they'd been confused by Carol's Facebook posts, but hadn't wanted to cause drama by asking questions. One of Jester's uncles pulled him aside for what looked like a serious conversation. I saw Jester nodding and then shaking his head, his expression tight. When he came back to me, he said his uncle had asked if we were going to press charges against Carol. Jester told him we just wanted her to stop lying and respect our choices. The uncle apparently agreed that what Carol did crossed a major line. An older woman I didn't recognize approached me near the drink table. She introduced herself as Jester's aunt on his father's side and asked if we could talk privately for a minute. I followed her to a quieter spot near some trees at the edge of the pavilion. She looked nervous and kept glancing back at the crowd. She told me she wanted to share something that might help me understand Carol better. When Jester was born, Carol had insisted on being in the delivery room even though Jester's father didn't want her there. She'd thrown such a fit that they finally gave in. Then after Jester was born, Carol tried to convince them to use a different middle name than they'd chosen. She said the name they picked was too common and wouldn't age well. She'd even filled out alternative paperwork and tried to submit it, but Jester's father caught her before she could. The aunt said Carol had always been controlling, but usually people just went along with it to keep the peace. She said watching what happened today made her realize how much damage that approach had caused over the years. She apologized for not speaking up sooner and said she should have warned us about Carol's patterns. I thanked her and told her I appreciated knowing this wasn't just about us. She hugged me and said she hoped we could set better boundaries going forward. When we walked back to the main group, I saw Ruth talking to several relatives in a circle. She waved me over and explained she was organizing a family meeting to discuss how to handle Carol's behavior. About 15 people gathered around as Ruth suggested we needed to establish clear expectations for Carol going forward. Marie spoke up first and said she'd been thinking about this a lot. She said Carol shouldn't have time alone with Luna until she could prove she'd respect our parenting decisions. I felt surprised and grateful that Marie would suggest something so direct. Trinity agreed immediately and said supervised visits only made sense after what Carol had done. Wyatt added that trust had to be earned back through actions, not just words. Several other relatives nodded and voiced their support. An older uncle tried to argue that we were being too harsh, and Carol had only made one mistake. Ruth cut him off and listed several other times Carol had overstepped boundaries with family members. She talked about Carol trying to plan her daughter's wedding without asking, showing up uninvited to her son's house repeatedly, and telling another relative how to discipline their children. Other people started sharing their own stories. Carly mentioned Carol had rearranged her kitchen cabinets while babysitting and got angry when Carly put everything back. Flynn said Carol had tried to return a birthday gift they'd given their son because she thought it was inappropriate. The stories kept coming, and I realized this pattern had been going on for decades. Everyone looked relieved to finally talk about it openly instead of pretending everything was fine. Ruth said they needed to present a united front and stop enabling Carol's behavior by always smoothing things over. Marie agreed and said Carol needed to face real consequences or she'd never change. The group decided together that anyone who gave Carol unsupervised access to their children or let her override their decisions would be accountable to the rest of the family. It felt like something important was shifting. Ruth announced it was time for the family photo and started gathering everyone together. She positioned us in rows on the pavilion steps with the older generation in chairs up front. Luna was awake and calm in my arms as we found our spot. Ruth made a point of announcing loudly that this was the first family photo with baby Luna Rose. She said the name twice more while arranging people, making sure everyone heard it clearly. During the photo countdown, someone in the back row called out asking where Carol was. Ruth said Carol had chosen to leave early and we were taking the photo without her. The photographer counted down and we all smiled. After the main photo, Ruth insisted on several smaller group shots. Each time she introduced Luna, she used her full name. Luna Rose with the cousins, Luna Rose with her generation, Luna Rose with Ruth's family branch. By the time we finished, I'd heard my daughter's real name spoken at least 20 times by different people. There was no way anyone could still be confused about what we'd named her. The rest of the afternoon continued without Carol's presence hanging over everything. People relaxed and the conversations felt more genuine. Jester's phone started buzzing in his pocket around 3 o'clock. He pulled it out and showed me a string of texts from Carol. The first one demanded he leave immediately and come talk to her. The second accused me of poisoning his family against her. The third said he was destroying their relationship by letting me humiliate her publicly. The fourth threatened to cut him out of her will if he didn't defend her. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate and angry than the last. Jester looked at me and asked what I thought we should do. I said we should ignore them until she calmed down enough to have a rational conversation. He nodded and put his phone back in his pocket without responding. More texts came through over the next hour, but he didn't check them. We stayed at the reunion until early evening when Luna started getting fussy. The drive home felt different from I'd expected. Jester was quiet for the first few miles, just focusing on the road. Then he started talking without me asking anything. He said he felt relieved that the truth was finally out there with his whole family. He said he'd been dreading family gatherings for months, knowing he'd have to defend his mother's actions or stay quiet while she lied. He said it had been eating at him, making him feel like he was betraying either me or his mother no matter what he did. He said he was sorry for not shutting her down harder right from the beginning. He said he should have taken the forms to the hospital himself instead of trusting Carol with them. He said he should have confronted her more forcefully when we first discovered what she'd done. His voice cracked a little as he talked, and I reached over to touch his arm. I told him Carol was good at manipulation, and he'd been caught in an impossible situation. I told him what mattered was that he'd stood by me today when it counted. He said he loved me and Luna more than anything, and he'd never let his mother come between us again. We drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. That night after we put Luna to bed, Jester's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his whole body tensed. It was Carol. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification popped up. He put it on speaker so we could both hear. Carol's voice came through shaky and breathless. She said she was having heart palpitations from all the stress we'd caused her. She said her chest hurt and she might need to go to the emergency room. She said if anything happened to her, it would be our fault for humiliating her in front of everyone. She said a mother shouldn't have to deal with this kind of treatment from her own son. The message ended and Jester immediately called Ruth. He asked if she'd heard from Carol and if she knew whether Carol was actually sick. Ruth said Carol had called her too with the same story about heart palpitations. Ruth had offered to drive her to the hospital, and Carol had suddenly said she felt better and didn't need to go. Ruth said Carol was fine and just being dramatic to get attention. She said Carol had pulled similar stunts before when she didn't get her way. Jester thanked her and hung up. He looked exhausted. I suggested we both get some sleep and deal with whatever came next in the morning. The next morning started normally enough. Luna woke us up at 6, demanding breakfast. Jester made coffee while I fed her. We were sitting at the kitchen table when the mail came through the slot in our front door. Jester went to get it and came back holding a large envelope with a law firm's return address. He opened it carefully and pulled out several pages of formal letterhead. His face went pale as he read. He handed the papers to me without saying anything. It was a letter from Carol's lawyer threatening to sue us for defamation and emotional distress. The letter claimed we had made false statements about Carol at a family gathering. It said we had damaged her reputation and caused her severe mental anguish. It demanded we issue a public apology and pay compensation for her suffering. It gave us 10 days to respond before they filed a lawsuit. I read it twice, feeling my anger build with each word. Jester grabbed his phone and forwarded the letter to our lawyer, the same one who'd helped us with the name change process. Our lawyer called back within an hour. He said Carol had no case because truth was an absolute defense against defamation. He said we'd told the truth about what she did, and we had documentation to prove it. He said he'd send a response letter making that clear. He said not to worry because this was likely just Carol trying to intimidate us into backing down. He said he'd handle everything. Jester thanked him and hung up. We sat there looking at each other, both of us realizing Carol wasn't going to let this go easily. Ruth called that afternoon to warn us about something else Carol was doing. She said Carol had been calling family members all morning trying to rally support. Carol was telling people we'd ambushed her at the reunion without warning. She was claiming we'd planned the whole confrontation to embarrass her publicly. She was saying she'd had no chance to defend herself because we'd turned everyone against her beforehand. Ruth said she'd been countering this story by reminding people that Carol had months to come clean about the name change. Ruth pointed out that Carol had chosen to keep lying instead of admitting what she'd done. Ruth said most people weren't buying Carol's victim narrative, but a few relatives seemed sympathetic. She warned us that Carol was probably going to keep trying to divide the family and make herself look like the wronged party. I thanked Ruth for the heads up and told her about the lawyer's letter. Ruth wasn't surprised. She said Carol always escalated when she didn't get her way. She said we needed to stay strong and not let Carol manipulate us into giving in. Over the next few days, my phone kept buzzing with messages from family members. Marie sent a long text saying she was cutting back her visits with Carol until things got sorted out. She said she loved her sister but couldn't support what happened with the birth certificate. Jester's cousin sent a similar message saying he and his wife were taking a break from family dinners at Carol's house. Ruth called to tell me that 3 more relatives had reached out to her privately saying they were limiting contact with Carol. She said the social pressure was real and Carol was feeling it. I felt weird about being the reason for family drama, but Ruth reminded me that Carol created this mess herself. The validation felt good even though watching a family split apart was messy and uncomfortable. Jester seemed relieved that people were taking our side, but I could see the guilt on his face every time someone mentioned distancing themselves from his mother. On Wednesday morning, Jester's phone lit up with a text from Carol. He showed it to me, and I read it twice to make sure I understood what she was saying. The message said she was sorry we got upset about the name situation, but she still thought Caroline was the better choice for our daughter's future. She wrote that she hoped we could move past this and focus on being a family again. Jester's jaw clenched as he typed out a response. He wrote that until she offered a real apology and committed to respecting our boundaries, contact would be minimal and supervised. He said we needed to see actual changed behavior, not just words designed to smooth things over. He hit send and tossed his phone onto the counter. I grabbed his hand and squeezed it, grateful that he was staying firm even though I knew this was killing him inside. That afternoon, Marie called and asked if we'd be willing to have a mediated conversation with Carol. She said she wasn't trying to pressure us and completely understood if we weren't ready. She just wanted to offer in case it might help everyone move forward. Jester and I talked about it after he hung up. We decided to tell Marie we'd consider it after Carol showed genuine changed behavior, not just apologetic words. I didn't trust that Carol actually understood what she'd done wrong. The non-apology text made it clear she still thought she was right about the name. Marie seemed to understand when we called her back. She said she'd keep the offer open but wouldn't push us. 2 weeks crawled by with no contact from Carol except for a few passive-aggressive posts on social media about ungrateful children. Then a thick envelope arrived in the mail with a law firm's return address. My stomach dropped thinking it was another threat, but when Jester opened it, we found something different. The letter said Carol's lawyer was withdrawing the defamation threat and requesting we all move forward peacefully. Jester immediately forwarded it to our lawyer. Our lawyer called back within an hour, sounding almost amused. He explained that this meant Carol had finally realized she had no legal standing and was backing down completely. He said we could stop worrying about any lawsuit because Carol's own lawyer had clearly explained reality to her. The relief that washed over me was so strong I had to sit down. Jester looked lighter too, like someone had lifted a weight off his shoulders. That night, Jester and I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook between us. We wrote down firm rules for any future contact with Carol. No unsupervised time with Luna under any circumstances. No undermining our parenting choices, or she'd be asked to leave immediately. She had to use Luna's correct name every single time or visits would end. If she bought anything with the wrong name on it, we'd return it and she'd lose visiting privileges for a month. We wrote everything down clearly so there could be no confusion later. Jester typed it all up on his laptop and formatted it to look official. We both signed it and emailed it to Carol with a read receipt request. Felt extreme but necessary after everything she'd pulled. Carol's response came 2 days later. She sent a brief text saying she acknowledged the boundaries we'd set. The message didn't sound enthusiastic or happy about it. She didn't say she agreed with our rules or thought they were fair. But it was the first time she'd acknowledged our right to set terms for our relationship with her. Jester said it wasn't ideal, but it was progress. I wasn't sure I believed it would last, but at least we had everything in writing now. If she violated the boundaries, we'd have clear documentation of what she'd agreed to. Luna's 4-month checkup fell on a Thursday morning. The pediatrician came in smiling and cooing at Luna on the exam table. She asked about Luna's development and eating habits while checking her over. Then she commented on what a beautiful name Luna had and asked about its meaning. I explained that Luna Rose honored my grandmother who raised me and Jester's mother's middle name. Talking about it made my throat tight with emotion. The doctor smiled and said it was lovely that we'd chosen something with such personal significance. Sitting there in that exam room, hearing someone appreciate my daughter's real name, I felt this deep sense of rightness. We'd fought so hard to preserve it and won. Luna would grow up knowing her real name, the one we'd chosen with love and meaning. Carol hadn't managed to take that away from us, no matter how hard she'd tried. Ruth called that weekend with an invitation to Thanksgiving at her house. She told us explicitly that Carol wouldn't be there because Carol had chosen to skip rather than follow our boundaries. Ruth said Carol had called her complaining about our rules, and Ruth had told her she needed to either respect them or stay home. Carol picked staying home. Hearing that made me feel sad for Jester because his mother was choosing her pride over seeing her family. But it also felt freeing to know we could attend family events without constant conflict. We could actually relax and enjoy ourselves instead of being on guard the whole time. Jester looked relieved when I told him we should go. He'd been worried about missing holidays with his extended family because of his mother's behavior. The following Tuesday, Jester told me he'd scheduled his first therapy appointment. He said he needed to process his complicated feelings about his mother's behavior and his role in protecting our family from her manipulation. He'd been carrying so much guilt about the situation even though none of it was his fault. Watching him take that step to prioritize our well-being over his mother's feelings made me love him even more. He was choosing us, choosing to work through the mess his mother had created instead of just trying to keep the peace. That night after Luna went to sleep, I held him on the couch and told him how proud I was of him. He cried a little, something he rarely did, and I just let him get it all out. A month after the reunion, I got a private message on social media from Trinity. She thanked me for standing up to Carol at the reunion because it gave her courage to set boundaries with her own controlling mother-in-law. She said watching me refuse to back down had shown her it was possible to protect your family without feeling guilty about it. She'd apparently been dealing with similar boundary violations and hadn't known how to address them. My story had helped her find her voice. Reading that message made all the stress and conflict feel worth it. If sharing what happened with Carol could help even one other person stand up for themselves, then something good had come from this nightmare. A month after Trinity's message, I got a text from Carol asking if she could visit on Luna's 6-month birthday. She said she had a gift she wanted to drop off. I stared at my phone for a solid minute trying to figure out what angle she was working. Jester looked over my shoulder and read the message. He said we should tell her no, but I felt this weird pull to see what she'd do. We'd been no contact for almost 3 months since the reunion, and part of me wanted to know if anything had actually changed. I texted back that she could come by for a quick visit, but we'd be keeping it short. She sent back a simple okay with no drama or guilt trips attached, which was unusual enough to make me nervous. She showed up exactly on time carrying a wrapped box and looking smaller somehow, less sure of herself. She held out the gift and I took it slowly like it might explode. The card on top said Luna Rose in Carol's handwriting. Not Caroline, not some passive-aggressive nickname. Luna Rose written out in full like she was actually accepting it. I opened the card and it was a basic happy 6 months message with no weird comments about names or how we were raising her wrong. Just a normal grandma card. I looked at Jester and he looked as confused as I felt. Carol asked if she could come in, and I almost said no automatically, but Jester stepped back from the doorway. He told her she could stay for 30 minutes under supervision, and she needed to follow our rules. I expected her to argue or cry or make some comment about how strict we were being, but she just nodded and said that was fair. We sat in the living room with Luna on a playmat between us, and Carol didn't immediately try to grab her or correct how we were doing things. She asked how Luna was developing and if she was sleeping better. Normal grandma questions without the underlying criticism she usually loaded into everything. I answered carefully while watching for signs this was an act. Luna grabbed one of her toys and shook it, and Carol smiled but didn't launch into a story about how Jester did the same thing at that age, or how we should be doing tummy time differently. She just watched Luna play. After about 20 minutes, Carol asked if she could hold her, and I looked at Jester. He picked Luna up and handed her to his mother with clear body language that said he was watching. Carol held Luna gently against her chest and talked to her softly about how big she was getting. She called her Luna multiple times. Luna Rose when she was being extra sweet. Not Caroline, not even once. The whole visit lasted exactly 30 minutes like we'd agreed, and then Carol stood up and handed Luna back without being asked. She thanked us for letting her come and said she hoped we could do it again sometime. No demands, no guilt trips about how little she got to see her granddaughter. Just a simple request that acknowledged we were in control. After she left, Jester and I sat on the couch in silence for a while. I asked him if that felt as weird to him as it did to me. He said his mother had never followed boundaries that easily in his entire life. We talked through whether this was real change or just her being on her best behavior to get back in our good graces. I wanted to believe she was actually trying, but I'd been burned too many times to trust it easily. Jester suggested we allow supervised visits on a trial basis and see if she could maintain the respectful behavior over time. If she started backsliding into her old patterns, we'd shut it down immediately. I agreed, but told him I was staying alert because people like Carol didn't usually change without a lot of work. 2 weeks later, Ruth called with an update about Carol's behavior with the rest of the family. She said Carol had been complaining to anyone who would listen about our strict rules and how unfair we were being. Ruth had heard from Marie that Carol spent an entire lunch talking about how she barely got to see Luna, and we were keeping her away on purpose. But here's the thing that actually surprised me. Even though Carol was complaining, she was still following the boundaries. She wasn't showing up unannounced or calling constantly or trying to manipulate other family members into pressuring us. She was following the rules while resenting them, which was more than I expected at this stage. Ruth said she thought Carol was slowly starting to understand that her old tactics weren't going to work anymore, but it was like watching someone learn a new language. Lots of mistakes and frustration, but some actual progress mixed in. Christmas came around and we decided to host a small gathering at our place. We invited Ruth and Marie and their families, but deliberately didn't invite Carol. It felt harsh, but we weren't ready to handle her at a major holiday yet. The risk of her making a scene or trying to take over was too high. Jester drove over to his mother's house 2 days before Christmas to drop off the gifts she'd sent for Luna. Every single one had Luna Rose written on the tag in Carol's handwriting. No Caroline anywhere. He said his mother looked sad when he explained she wasn't invited to Christmas, but she didn't argue or try to guilt him into changing his mind. She just asked him to take pictures and send them to her. The actual Christmas gathering was relaxed and happy without the constant tension of managing Carol's behavior. Luna wore a little red dress, and Ruth took about 100 photos. Marie's kids played with Luna's new toys, and everyone used her correct name without any drama. It was the first family holiday in months where I didn't spend the whole time braced for conflict. A few days after Christmas, Marie pulled me aside during a quick visit to drop off some leftovers. She told me that Carol had been going to therapy. Not just once or twice, but regularly for the past 2 months. Her sisters had basically insisted on it after the reunion blow-up, and Carol had actually followed through. Marie said the therapist was helping Carol recognize how her controlling behavior had damaged her relationships with Jester and the rest of the family. She was apparently working on understanding why she felt the need to control everything, and learning to respect other people's choices even when she disagreed. I asked Marie if she thought it was making a real difference, and she said it was slow, but she could see Carol trying. She'd catch herself mid-sentence when she was about to give unsolicited advice and actually stop herself. It was small stuff, but it was something. I told Marie I was cautiously hopeful, but I wasn't holding my breath for some dramatic transformation. People didn't usually change their core personality even with therapy. But if Carol was genuinely trying, then maybe there was room for some kind of relationship eventually. Jester and I celebrated our wedding anniversary in early January by going out to dinner while Ruth watched Luna. We spent most of the meal talking about how far we'd come in the past year. From the nightmare of the birth certificate fraud, to the reunion confrontation, to this weird new phase where Carol was actually following boundaries. Jester said he was proud of how we'd handled everything, and how we'd protected our family without completely cutting his mother out. I told him I was proud of him for choosing us over keeping the peace with Carol. We made a commitment that night to keep protecting our boundaries while leaving room for Carol to earn back trust through consistent behavior over time. Not through dramatic apologies or grand gestures, but through steady, respectful actions that proved she understood what she'd done wrong. Luna started sleeping through the night around 7 months old, and it felt like I was finally emerging from the fog of new motherhood and trauma. I'd been running on survival mode for so long that having actual energy and mental clarity felt strange. I could look back at the whole birth certificate situation and feel proud of how we'd handled it instead of just angry and hurt. We'd fought for our daughter's name and won. We'd set boundaries with Carol and enforced them even when it was uncomfortable. We'd built a support system with Ruth and Marie and other family members who respected us. Luna would grow up knowing her real name and seeing her parents model what healthy boundaries looked like. That felt like the best possible outcome from such a terrible situation. When Luna's first birthday was coming up, Ruth offered to organize a small family gathering at her house. She asked if we wanted Carol to be invited and left the decision completely up to us. Jester and I talked about it for a few days. Carol had been maintaining supervised visits for months without any major incidents. She was still in therapy and seemed to be making genuine effort to respect our parenting choices. We decided to let her come, but made it clear she needed to ask permission instead of assuming she was invited. Carol called Jester directly and asked if it would be okay for her to attend Luna's birthday party. She didn't demand or guilt trip. She just asked. We said yes and told her we expected appropriate behavior. She said she understood. The party was at Ruth's house with about 15 family members. Carol showed up with a wrapped gift and a homemade cake she'd baked with Luna Rose written in pink frosting. She used Luna's correct name throughout the entire party. Every single time she talked about her or to her, it was Luna. She didn't try to take over or criticize how we were doing things. She didn't make passive-aggressive comments about our parenting. She just participated like a normal grandma at a normal birthday party. Luna smashed her cake and got frosting everywhere, and Carol laughed and took pictures without saying anything about how messy she was or how we should be doing it differently. It was surreal watching her actually follow through on respectful behavior. Near the end of the party, Carol asked if she could talk to me privately for a minute. My first instinct was to say no, because private conversations with Carol usually meant manipulation, but Jester nodded at me like he thought I should hear her out. We went out to Ruth's back porch, and Carol stood there looking nervous in a way I'd never seen before. She told me she wanted to apologize for what she'd done with the birth certificate and everything that came after. Not the fake apologies she'd tried before where she said she was sorry we were upset. A real apology that acknowledged she'd violated our trust and caused real harm. She said she'd been working with her therapist to understand why she felt entitled to make decisions for our family, and it had been hard to face how controlling and disrespectful her behavior had been. She didn't make excuses or try to justify what she'd done. She just said she was sorry and she was trying to do better. I could see she'd been working on this in therapy because the words came out carefully like she'd practiced them, but also genuine. I told her I accepted her apology, but rebuilding trust was going to take time and consistent effort. I told her I accepted what she said, but this wasn't something that got fixed overnight. Trust takes time to build back up, and she needed to show me through her actions over months and years that she really meant what she was saying. This couldn't just be one nice conversation at a party and then everything goes back to how it was before. She needed to prove she understood what she did was wrong and that she respected us as Luna's parents. Carol looked me right in the eyes and said she understood completely. She said she knew she had a lot of work to do and she wasn't expecting us to forget what happened just because she apologized. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I actually believed she might be capable of real change. Something in her voice sounded different from all the other times she'd tried to apologize or make excuses. She wasn't crying or making herself the victim. She was just accepting responsibility. That night, after everyone left, Jester and I sat down at the kitchen table and talked about what came next with his mom. We both agreed we couldn't just pretend nothing happened and go back to normal visits. Carol needed to earn back the privilege of being part of Luna's life. We decided to set up a schedule of supervised visits where one of us would always be present. We wrote down specific rules about respecting our parenting choices and using Luna's correct name. We also talked about what would happen if Carol started backsliding into her old controlling behavior. If she broke the rules even once, we'd go back to no contact for at least a month. Jester called his mom the next day and explained the new arrangement. She agreed to everything without arguing, which honestly surprised both of us. Over the next 6 months, Carol showed up for her scheduled visits and followed every single rule we set. She never tried to undermine our decisions about Luna or make passive-aggressive comments about how we were doing things wrong. She used Luna's correct name every single time without hesitation. It wasn't perfect because there was still tension between us, and I don't think I'll ever fully trust her the way I did before. But we reached a point where the relationship was working well enough that Luna could have a grandmother in her life. Carol was limited to supervised visits twice a month, and she had to ask permission before buying gifts or planning anything with Luna. The boundaries were clear, and she was actually respecting them. Our family had found a new balance that felt functional, even if it wasn't ideal. Ruth organized a family barbecue at her house in late summer, and we all showed up, including Carol. Luna was almost walking by then and kept pulling herself up on furniture trying to take steps. Everyone gathered around watching her wobble and grab onto things. Then she let go of the coffee table and took 3 shaky steps across the room before falling onto her bottom. The whole family cheered and clapped. Carol was standing near me and she started clapping too while calling out encouragement. She said Luna's full name with so much genuine happiness in her voice. Hearing her say Luna Rose with real joy instead of resistance made something loosen in my chest. Maybe we really had turned a corner. Maybe Carol was actually going to be the grandmother Luna deserved instead of the controlling nightmare she'd been. Our daughter would grow up knowing her real name and watching her parents stand firm on boundaries. She'd see what healthy family relationships looked like even when they were complicated. That felt like the best thing I could give her after everything we'd been through.